Full disclosure, before I even boarded for this trip, QM2 was already my favourite ship. But it's not what it used to be. Has it changed for better? Has it changed for worse? And more importantly, is it still sitting on the top spot? Here, ladies and gentlemen, we go. Oh, there it is. When you first spot the ship you're heading to, it's always an exciting moment, even more so when that ship is QM2. CPS was full by the time I booked parking, so I parked with Lynx, which was advertised as a meet and greet, but it's what normal people would call a park and ride. Whatever, from slamming the car door to stepping on board was 37 minutes all in, so still pretty good. When you board a Cunard ship, you're greeted by crew wearing red, old-school bellhop-style uniforms. Generally, they smile and say, "Good morning, good morning, good morning," as guests wander past. Inspired by, well, I don't know what, this guy looked at me, a 42-year-old dull white man, and said, "Yo, welcome to my yard, homie," and offered a fist bump. Then obviously had a moment of panic when he wondered if he'd misjudged the greeting, and starting to act like he'd been a glitch in the Matrix, straightened up and said, "Good morning." He relaxed again as I said, "Sup?" and we had 30 seconds of chit-chat. He boards straight onto the Atrium, the grand lobby, and immediately it sets the tone for what's to come. There's a harpist playing, the crew are dressed for a fancy dress party, everything looks old-worldy, and if Winslets floated past on an old door, you wouldn't even blink. Atrium, 8 out of 10. First thing first, find the cabin. Drop the school bag and grab my cruise card. I won't ever be doing tedious 20-minute cabin tours. Here's the cabin. It's the same as every inside cabin ever, but it's got a window looking into the atrium. Here's a chair, here's a little table. That bottle in the middle is free sparkling whatever. It always used to be Polacca, which a certain type of Cunard passenger likes to mock, despite the fact that they would complain at the purser's desk if it was missing. Don't know what it tastes like. I don't drink, so I'll take it home from mother, who really does. This is a bed. I slept in it. The blind doesn't lift up out the way. It's got two settings, open and closed. So, more or less useless if you were hoping for some people watching. Here's a smallish TV with no video on demand. That cupboard below holds the minibar, and in the wardrobe there's a kettle. You can also put your clothes in there. Bathroom is ensuite sized, compact but fine. If you need to stretch out whilst pooping, then you can poke your feet through into the shower. It's an old ship, so it still has a shower curtain. But like always, I managed not to rub myself up against it like vloggers are constantly complaining that they do. And I also didn't whack my head on the shower, also a common YouTube complaint. I'm not saying that they're fibbing for content, but I'm 6'2" and 220 pounds, so... Cabin, 6 out of 10. Maybe a 7 if they weren't playing Titanic. If you're in a poor people cabin, which I am this time, and the vast majority of all guests are, then your main dining room is also by far the nicest, the Brittania. Split over 2 decks with anytime dining upstairs and traditional early and late dining downstairs, an enormous ship art relief thing on the wall. It's on decks 2 and 3, so there must be light bulbs behind that glass up in the ceiling, which I always forget and think it's a skylight. Food was all good, always arrived quickly and hot, which isn't a given in the main dining room. There's plenty of choice, and the room is really, really good. Main dining room, 9 out of 10. Okay, the Tablemate Roundup. Wow. On night 1 of this 4-night trip, my table of 6 had 3 empty seats. Now, I don't know if 3 people were in specialty dining or decided on room service or buffet that night, or if the table was only half full. The other 2 chairs with bums in were occupied by Rob and Sarah. At first, Rob introduced himself as a DJ and started some conversation about nightclubs at sea, virgin voyages and Ibiza before a bit of explorative chit-chat revealed he actually works for Volvo and does part-time DJing for business events, weddings and birthday parties. In the space of around 3 minutes, he went from Carl Cox to Carl Pilkington. I didn't catch what Sarah does for a living, and I don't like to be as basic as asking, "And what do you do?" The impression that I got was if she doesn't do it full-time, then it's at least a committed hobby, agreeing with everything Rob says. They're actually a very nice couple, late 40s I'd say, with older teenagers not with them on this cruise. Been on a few cruises, mainly P&O, and at least 1 Virgin Voyages. Nights 2 and 3 I was in specialty dining, I'll tell you later. And when I returned to the main dining room on the last night, there was no Rob, no Sarah, no 3 mystery strangers. So, the bad news was that I was sat alone, like the loser cruiser that I am, at a massive round table set for 6. On the bright side, at least I was right in the centre of this enormous room, so the people upstairs could look down on me literally, and the people around me could look down on me figuratively. Rob and Sarah knew that I was booked in for specialty dining on nights 2 and 3, and they made a point of waving and saying hello whenever they spotted me in the wild, so I don't think they ditched me. I can only assume that they died. As I only had 2 tablemates on one evening, I won't rate them here. I'll include them in the guest rating later. I usually avoid the buffet outside of late night snacks, but especially on embarkation day. But this time I was really hungry, and I boarded early, so I risked it. And it was fine. The food is never the problem. Well, sometimes the food's a problem. But mainly it's the crowds and people elbowing each other to get the last slice of pizza. One of the quirks of QM2 is that the buffet is on deck 7, in the middle of the ship, rather than way up high, same deck as the Promenade, and they still keep the tradition of pointless ice sculptures alive. This time, a particularly slutty looking mermaid/angel thing with a beard, I think. The buffet is really good, the usual salad, roast dinner and curry stations, a sushi and sashimi station, which I only ever take from if I saw the food being dropped seconds earlier, fish, lots of puddings which generally are made of ingredients rather than cruise ship gelatin, big fat pieces of cheese, biscuits, crackers, most importantly, soft serve ice cream machines. I sat down to eat my lunch and an old Indian chap put a plate down and sat down at the table next to me. He looked a bit forlorn, so I said, "Don't worry, you're on board now." Well, that was a mistake. He was shocked that I'd thought him to be sad in the first place and went on to tell me at length that he's 80 years old, travels the world with his wife, teaching the art of happiness through yoga. He reasoned that he probably looked like something was missing because his wife wasn't by his side, and admittedly he did seem to pep up when she sat down a minute or so later. He told me without any smile or hint of irony that to be happy I must follow the 3 S's: meditation, charity, daily communication with God, surrender, the universe has a better plan for me than I do, being happy. Now, the eagle-eared amongst you will have spotted that only one of the 3 S's begins with an S. The 4th one of 5 of the 3 S's. He was such a lovely, sweet old guy that I just accepted his advice, and I didn't point out that steps 1, 2, 3 and 4 weren't really needed if you can just do step 5. I saw him twice more. Once when he was sat in the lobby with his wife. I waved at his wife as I passed, but he was reading. Moments later he tapped me on my shoulder and shook my hand, really squeezing hard and reminding me that he's 80 and was I impressed at his strength. The second time was on the last evening, and I was just sitting on the prom deck minding my own business with a coffee watching the sunset. He reminded me that when he asked me if I was married, I'd said no, nobody loves me, and then explained that he'd been thinking a lot about that and he'd started to make arrangements for me to have a wonderful and beautiful Indian bride. He showed me a picture, and I don't know if she was wonderful, but she was beautiful. I could hear a couple laughing behind me as they listened in, and I wrestled with trying not to swap details whilst also not offending him, and in the end I gave him my phone that he could put his number in, and I agreed that I'd call him when we were back on land. Anyway, buffet, 8 out of 10. On night 2 I dined at Bamboo, the pop-up specialty A Extra restaurant. Bamboo is Oriental fusion with a set platter type starter thing. You choose a main and then you get what you give him for pudding. I asked the waiter what he recommended for mains and he told me definitely the tofu. I explained that I really like meat and he confirmed that even so I should have the tofu. And he didn't change his mind when I said that I'd take his recommendation, but if it was rubbish then I would come back here and I would smash this place up. He never wavered. Starter was excellent, really great. It was hot, it was tasty, it was good as any restaurant on land. The main course, the tofu that waiter had recommended, was unbelievable in that I could not believe he'd let me put it in my mouth. I started to wonder if I'd wronged him on a past cruise or maybe in a previous life. I don't know what the reason was, but it was clear that Mohammed, the waiter, hated me. The pudding was a trio of something or other, but obviously whomever wrote the menu learned to count from the yoga guy because there were 4 parts. Nothing offensive, nothing delicious. Mainly, it tasted of regret. Bamboo, 3 out of 10. On night 3 I dined at Varandah, the steakhouse. Caviar, asparagus with a hen's egg, ribeye, lobster tail, bone marrow and onion rings, and broccoli, followed by rum baba. This is exactly the same meal I had in Queen Victoria in January, and it was just as good this time around, but the only reason I chose a rum bar was because on QV, the dude that did the tableside preparation, which is a very grandiose way to describe pouring a shot of rum on a sponge cake, did a very funny and theatrical spiel about the different rum choices on offer. This guy just said, "Which one do you want?" and poured it on. Didn't exactly spoil my evening, but it did make dessert 10% less delicious. Varandah, 8 out of 10. Chef's Galley is a bit of an unusual one. During the day, it's the equivalent of the standard Lido grill, where you can get burgers, fries, hot dogs from the open kitchen, and pizza and pasta from the buffet counter. It's in a party dress, and it's miles away from a pool. It's included in the fare, but separate from the buffet, and in the evening it's sat out with tablecloths and cutlery and glasses. It seems like most people think it's a pay extra venue. At night, it's made to order pizza and pasta from the kitchen, and the buffet section is closed to make way for whatever that week's pop-up restaurant is. Be very wary of Mohammed the tofu dealer. That then makes way for late night snacks from about 11 till 1:30. I had a hot dog and a few fries one lunchtime, and I stopped by for a pizza one evening. Both were good. Chef's Galley, 8 out of 10. Cafe Corinthia is a lounge / coffee shop / bar / cafe / venue, also on deck 7. This is the connoisseur's choice for a casual breakfast or lunch, with a small range of good quality items available. Think eggs Benedict and bagels and that kind of thing. I had breakfast here one morning, and these donuts were absolutely rocking. I won't tell you how many I had, but if you can count, then you'll be able to see it was 6. There's at least a couple of quizzes here each day, and live music on and off from lunchtime until late. This is also a step up from the buffet for a less formal afternoon tea when you can't be bothered with the Queen's Room. Cafe Corinthia, 7 out of 10. This is Sir Samuel's. Here you'll pay for your coffee, but the pastries are included in your fare. I never had any. I do not donut around. Coffee is supplied by Union. It's hot and black and bitter. Just like me, if I was also hot and black. Generally busy, but never full, and particularly nice if you snag a window seat. 6 out of 10. This is the Golden Lion, British pub at sea. Queen Mary's is probably at the least like a proper pub of all the Cunard chips, but it's still a favourite venue for many, and by the time lunchtime service comes around, the place has been full for an hour. Fish and chips followed by sticky toffee pudding is always my choice, but there's always a pie, a ploughman's and a curry available. In recent times there have been pay extra options added to the menu, a burger and most oddly a cheese toastie and a few other things. I didn't order any pay extra items because I'd learned from my tofu mistake. The Commodore Club is Cunard's name for the cocktail bar up high at the front of the ship. QM2's Commodore Club is small, bordering on being a very wide corridor, and like every version of this bar on every ship, it's quiet all day and rammed all night. People get there, grab a table by a window, and they set up camp for hours. Stay portside if you don't like smoking. The smell seeps out from Churchill Cigar Lounge over the other side. It's small, it's comfortable, there's live music for background rather than like a gig. 7 out of 10. The chart room's a fairly nondescript cocktail bar in a sort of T-shape, with a bar arching around one section of the T and a stage area opposite, which is more of a trip hazard than anything, where some kind of live music often is. It's fine. Unremarkable. If QM2 had more bars, then this one would likely be forgotten about by most, but it's not a destination venue, just somewhere you'll find yourself in now and then before or after dinner. Chart room, 5 out of 10. At one end of the chart room, it spills into the champagne bar, which is obviously more Cheshire. Like a diamond, it's small and sparkly. It also has nicer chairs, which are just on the tasteful side of Versace-ish. Champagne bar, 6 out of 10. This is the Queen's Room, super famous amongst Cunard guests. This is where the ballroom dancing happens and where afternoon tea is served every day. People who like to pretend that they're refined and elegant reveal their true colours when they get to the Queen's Room for tea, with 10 minutes to go and they can't find a table. These are the scenes at 2:45. Afternoon tea doesn't start until 3:30. It is popular. Usually I would come for afternoon tea every day. Warning for first timers, there's an odd little tradition of clapping on the waiting staff at the start. Now the first time I saw this I thought it was really weird, but now I've seen it dozens of times and I think it's really weird. I came twice in a row and both times the entire sandwich selection just tasted like bread. fillings are getting thinner. Cake's all okay, scone's still good, still with actual cream. There were dance lessons and Zumba during the day and proper dancing in the evenings with a band or an orchestra, or once in a while just someone pressing play. As a 42-year-old white man who cruises alone, I don't and can't dance. But I often like to drop by for half an hour here and there to spectate. Afternoon tea is not what it used to be. Queen's room, 6 out of 10. To get to the Queen's room from almost anywhere, you'll end up going down some steps, through the art gallery and back up some steps the other side. Like P&O, Cunard chips are galleried by Clarendon, and like P&O, only buy if you want something for the dining room. These are not investment pieces, no matter how disingenuous the art consultant is. Whilst I was on board, the same Banksy Mr. Brainwash lecture took place as when I was on Arcadia the month before. Another guest I was chatting to confirmed that the same hinting that Brainwash was about to rocket in value, so quickly come and buy some sign-off, was used. As per every ship, this is just a shop pretending to be more. The rest of the shops are scattered around deck 3 around the Atrium. A relatively strong showing for ship shops. Plenty of variety, cheap watches, decent watches, jewellery, perfume, souvenirs, duty free. No inch of gold, but tap fans can still stock up on Pandora. I'm not sure if the world's highest priced second-hand shop is a good use of space, and I am certain that the Fabergé egg shop isn't. I'd never pay that much for an egg, no matter how hungry I was. There's a really sad little space opposite the pub, the photo gallery. Obviously, it's not 1990 anymore, and hardly anyone is buying printed photos in a cardboard frame, which is why mad eyeball pictures are doing the round these days, I suppose. It's only a matter of time before photo galleries are repurposed on all ships into something that brings in more money. When you pass by, just look at your phone or the floor or pretend that you're blind. Whatever you do, do not make eye contact with the photo. You will be able to recognise them by their wide, unblinking eyes, tight, dry toothed smile, the bead of sweat formed on the forehead and the growing aura of desperation as the clock ticks by. And hitting the sail target gets less and less and less likely. The purser's desk, reception if you like, well, that's where dreadful people go to remove gratuities from their onboard account. And that's where there's usually a pretty decent sized queue waiting to do just that. I was doubly surprised that there never seemed to be much of a queue on this cruise, as not only did it appear that fewer than normal were lining up to be cheap, but I was anticipating a lot of moaning about the recently introduced charges for room service. The charges are neither here nor there really, $2 for this, $3 for that. But when I, and presumably almost everyone on board, booked, room service was included in the fare. The introduction of charges has been rolled out badly. What Cunard should have done is just up the fare by a few dollars a day and leave the room service menu alone. As they've decided to introduce charges, that should have been done going forwards with new bookings, not by taking away something that was already included and advertised as a selling point for existing bookings. Tut tut Cunard, shame on you. I had room service breakfast one morning. It arrived hot, it was on time, and it was all perfectly nice. I ordered far too much for a human to eat, but obviously I still managed because I am not a quitter. Just because of the dreadful way charges have been introduced, I'm going to say room service, 3 out of 10. Opposite reception on deck 2 is the casino. I don't like anything that I'm not immediately good at, so my one visit to a casino when I was 18 was also my last. But if you like to throw good money after bad, then this is the place for you. Various machines with flashing lights and noises, card tables, a couple of those spinny wheel things. Unlike a lot of ships, this casino has no smoking. And as a ship that carries a lot of Americans transatlantic, it's actually pretty small. These are cabins for people with a gambling problem, literally open into the casino. Here's where you can dull your senses if hemorrhaging cash is getting to you, or you're accidentally considering making better choices and you just want to power through. No rating because it's not my thing. This is the Royal Court Theatre. It's decent if not exciting. You'd probably expect it to be a bit more grand and traditional. Split over decks 2 and 3, plenty of seating with good sight lines, and the stage protrudes right out into the audience. When I first came to film, I couldn't get in because a Hayes Travel sales seminar was going on. I don't know if they talked about stealing my money when they overcharged me £700 for an upcoming Virgin cruise, but I expect they probably did. Night 1 was comedian Kev Orkian, as was night 4. As you can see, he drew quite the crowd. I've never thought that one unknown person on the stage is ever really suitable to be the show on a cruise ship, but I've sailed with Cunard often enough to know that the shows are always on the small side. Kevorkian is the dated, end-of-the-pier type comedian that you're more likely to see in a hotel function room than a proper comedy club. I haven't seen him for around 10 years, so I gave him the benefit of the doubt and I went along to the first night's show. And much like my father, every time he watches The Shawshank Redemption, around the halfway stage I started thinking, I'm sure I've seen all this before. Then, as the warden puts his hand through the poster and finds the tunnel, and Kevorkian started singing Elton John from a scratch CD, I knew that I'd seen it all before. And it hadn't changed in 10 years. Curiosity got the better of me and Google revealed that he's been doing exactly the same stuff since at least 2014. Cutting edge comedy. Night 2 was the ship's entertainment team doing singing and dancing with no story or point, but it was a fun way to spend 45 minutes and the only attempt at a show on this short cruise. Not likely to win any awards, but I enjoyed it. I skipped night 3 as that was a barbershop quartet, which didn't appeal, and of course on night 4, I could see no reason why I'd sit through yet more Shawshank, knowing that there was going to be no redemption. During the day, the theatres used for what Cunard called insight talks, guest speakers chatting about this or sometimes that. There was a guy who used to be a prison governor talking about locking people up. I saw him twice and it was pretty interesting. He was followed by a very intelligent, very boring woman talking about plastic surgery, which made me want to learn the basics just so I could sew my own eyes and ears closed. The surprise of the trip came from an appearance by Leslie Joseph, Dorian from Birds of a Feather, for anyone old enough to remember her. Now, she has obviously done this same scripted Q&A a million times, as the cruise director would ask her a question and then she would launch into a long and detailed paragraph without ever stopping to think or even take a breath. But it's actually very entertaining, even for me, barely old enough to remember her, so for the typical Cunard passenger, it must have been incredible. Another surprise was a Ukrainian strings trio that I went along to just because I was nearby at the time. They were incredible. A few times they would hit this note and it sent a literal shiver down my spine. I don't know if it was being caught off guard or what, but I chased them around other venues to see them again, but I never had that same tingling feeling again. All good theatre, 6 out of 10. Right behind the theatre is Illuminations, which was the first planetarium at sea. Now, it's a criminally underused space that shows a movie a couple of times a day and not much else. I watched a Bridget Jones film in there and it was fine, good even. I mean the venue, not Bridget Jones, which obviously was awful. The planetarium has been broken for most of the last year or two, with the occasional repair that's worked briefly to put it back into action, but now, as far as I can tell, it is dead. This place is basically a spare theatre, and where they should put dated comedians out to pasture whilst they put on a decent show in the actual theatre. I'd have given them that advice for free, but they didn't even ask me. Illuminations Planetarium, 0 out of 10. Illuminations Spare Theatre / Cinema, 8 out of 10. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking that obviously QM2 wouldn't have a nightclub. And if it did, then it definitely wouldn't be a sleazy 80s style nightclub with wood veneer and black leather bench seating. I bet you're thinking if QM2 did have a sleazy 80s style nightclub, they definitely wouldn't put it right next to the Queen's Room, the home of elegance and ballroom dancing. Well, that shows what you know. I don't know if maybe Cunard thought that QM2 was going to be Queen Anne before Queen Anne was Queen Anne, or what. This place is wildly out of keeping with the rest of the ship. Every night on this cruise I stuck my head in to see what was going on in there, and every night the answer was the same. Nothing. Bar staff stood in an empty club chatting to one another whilst one or two old swingers sipped a cocktail, waited for the hotties to turn up. G32, 4 out of 10. If you ever find yourself on board QM2 and visit G32 unironically, the following morning you will likely be examining your life choices and pledging to make better decisions. One of them might be to eat better and get more exercise. QM2's got a small but very decent gym. There's a dozen or so Bogo treadmills and 2 of the curve runners that I prefer, old school cross trainers, modern crossers, row machines, bikes for Nan, bikes for Nan's Nan. There's a reasonable selection of resistance machines, Only one bar and a couple of plates, but there is a multi-squat rack. Enough for most people to get a workout in, and certainly more than enough for the average QM2 passenger. Gym, 7 out of 10. Cunard still advertises the basketball court and football pitch that were removed about, 100 years ago, but there's still a driving net and a short tennis court up on deck 13, and points and shuffleboard areas painted on the deck. I never saw anyone using any of these areas, and you'd think that deck games are going to be phased out as ships move forwards. There's a golf simulator down on deck 12, but it was broken during this cruise. I've used it before, and it wouldn't be the worst thing if they replaced it with something more modern, like, Pac-Man or an abacus. The pavilion pool is also up on 12, a covered indoor pool with a couple of ping pong tables, 2 hot tubs and some nice padded lounges. I very rarely hit the lounges, and I never hit the pool, so I didn't really spend any time here. When I did stick my head in, it was always quiet, so maybe a nice spot to relax, I relaxed once a few years back, and it wasn't for me. If you prefer fewer steps between the buffet and the splash zone, then the terrace pool is on deck 8. There's a hot tub, there's plenty of sun lounges, very occasionally the bar is open. Again, not used much, but it makes a good photo, and it's a good spot to spend your thoughtful time staring at the wake at midnight. Like a madman. If that's your thing, it is mine. Up above where I filmed this is the Grills Terrace, which I didn't film this time because I was in a poor people cabin, but the first time I was in Grills was QM2, and when I opened the door and stepped out onto the Grills Terrace, I actually laughed out loud. It's a small, sad little deck with a smaller, sadder little hot tub that looks a bit like a bucket of warm water. Below the terrace pool is a kiddie pool and the kids club area. I also didn't film that. Obs. If the gym, dwarf tennis and splash time don't close your rings, then you'll want to get some laps of the prom deck in. I like to do a 5k walk in the prom deck each day on a ship, so on QM2 that's just over 8 laps. Proper wooden wraparound deck. Teak? Is it teak? I hear people say teak a lot. Lifeboats overhead where they belong, loads of seating, although they're too horizontal to be called chairs and too upright to be called lounges, and they don't adjust. I can say from experience that whilst they aren't really very comfortable and you can't really get an ocean view nap in, if you really put your mind to it, then you can force out a wee awkward angled sleep. There are a few pinch points as you're lapping, and occasionally you can get stuck behind Jeffrey and Mildred as they shuffle through the narrow bits, which I did get frustrated by a few times before I reminded myself, I'm walking around in circles in the middle of the sea, going literally nowhere. Why am I in a rush? There is loads of outdoor space on QM2. As well as prom deck, there's a sort of tiered aft, not an elegant or pretty one like Aurora, but functional and spacious. At the front, there's room to get out in front of the prom deck to where the spare propeller blades are. Now, people love to tell you this, and there's even a sign confirming that it's true, that the crew affectionately call these things the Commodore's cufflinks. They don't. The crew do not care about them, think about them, or talk about them, affectionately or otherwise. Their main function is photo op for the passengers. Being spare parts is a secondary. Below the bridge is the observation deck where you can see both forward and backwards and take awesome pictures like this one. 2 decks above it is the lookout, which gives similar views forwards but with a windscreen, particularly useful for sailings in the fjords. Also up high there's loads of open deck space where Cunard will still tell you that a football pitch and a basketball court is. These table and chairs are there so you can eat whatever you get from the Boardwalk Cafe, which has never been open on any trip I have ever taken on QM2. But let's pretend that sometimes it does open. I mean, I wouldn't eat there anyway. It's right next to the lamppost and fire hydrant that are there for dogs to pee on. Up here is also where you can get a picture of the name tag, if you are a cruiser loser, which I am. You can't really get a good picture of the funnel, which will only bother you if you're also a cruiser loser, which I am. I didn't visit the Aqua Therapy Centre this time, but I've been in the past. I wouldn't really recommend it on QM2. Last time I did visit was about a year ago, and it was pretty shabby with tiles missing, the foot spars were broken, the steam room was cold. It's also very bright in there. Most Aqua Therapy suites are sort of moody and romantic these days. A combination of bright lights, white walls and the sound of powerful water jets. It's more like an interrogation than relaxation. If you really need an Aqua Therapy Centre, go on Queen Victoria instead. So, the passengers. Well, generally, pretty good. There's a certain type of passenger that wrongly think that Cunard is high-end and that by booking on board, they are ever so fancy. You know the type. Hyacinth bouquets who like to pretend that they are related to the royal family, have infinite wealth, and look down on other lines using butlins at sea and calling themselves Cunarders. Cunard is not high-end. It's a mid-market line that is actually starting to flirt with being a budget line. Certainly for Brittania cabins, which is the vast majority, prices are generally not a million miles away from P&O. Gratuities are extra, but if you're dreadful then you'll remove those. Please don't. I'm pleased to say that none of the guests I interacted with were hyacinths. There was a lady in the veranda who I thought was one, but it turned out she was making fun of one that she had bumped into. Our tablemates on night one were good company. The old dude that arranging my marriage was sweet, and the general chit-chat with people around the ship was all perfectly pleasant. I never heard anyone being rude to the crew, which happens way more often than it should. And even though this was a short 4-nighter, it wasn't so much a booze cruise as a snooze cruise. Yes, 9 out of 10. The crew were absolutely rocking. It started strong with the gangster bellboy that greeted me on board. The waiting staff in the restaurants were all great, full of chat and personality, and there were enough staff to look after the number of guests on board. My cabin steward was invisible like a ninja, sneaking in every morning to just move my toothbrush, and every evening to put the next day's planner and 2 chocolates on my bed. In a rare departure from the norm, the cruise director was perfectly pleasant too. Not at all cheesy and acted like an adult. The shoppies were friendly and chatty, the spa girls were nice, everyone, everywhere, all at once was brilliant. Crew, 10 on 10. Some of you will know about the cruise ship duck thing, and if you don't, well, I'm not telling you, but I'm sad to say duck spotted 1. This is the first time that I've ever spotted a duck, and on QM2 where it's almost full of grown-ups. Sad times. Some of you know about the cruise ship pineapple thing, and if you don't, well, I'm not telling you. But I'm pleased to say pineapple spotted 0. Some of you will be loser cruisers like me who love spotting other ships. I'm fairly disappointed to say ship spotted just 2. Brittania and Queen Anne. So, the money. I paid £838 for 4 nights, solo, and a standard Atrium view cabin. CPS were fully booked, so I parked with Links, which was £85.50. I bought internet on 2 sea days, but my loyalty tier paid for most of that, so internet was only $5, which is £3.73. I booked Bamboo at £23.53 and Varandah at £45.09 before I boarded, and then I had caviar and lobster tail on the night, which was £41. Drinks clocked in at $31.07, which is £23.16. That includes a bottle of Diet Coke, a Diet Coke from the gun, 4 black coffees, and a minibar lemonade. Other than that, I drank a lot of the buffet black coffee, still lemonade, about a dozen cups of Queen Room tea, and half a glass of complimentary champagne on the last night. Gratuities, which you should absolutely pay, were $68 or £50.69. I did give a few tips, but I won't add those in because they're absolutely not expected or required, and that's just personal choice. All in all, that gives us a total of £1,109.70 or £277.43 per night. That is just shy of £60 per night cheaper than a trip on Arcadia a month earlier. And even I'm quite surprised by that. Arcadia was a sea view, but Atrium view is similar. I mean, neither's got a balcony, and on this trip, about £100 of specialty dining, which I didn't have at all on Arcadia, and the food was a big step up on all levels. So Cunard is the bargain hunter's choice. Getting off was pretty good. I joined the queue at 8:40, stepped off the ship at 8:47, and collected my case at 8:52. Once outside, I called Links at 8:55, I was on the minibus by 8:57, and after a few more joined us, we set off back to the car park at 9:05, and I was sat in the driving seat at 9:20. QM2, done.